The sky had turned the color of an open wound when Caroline Abbott felt the ground tremble beneath her boots. She had been running for what felt like hours, though her rational mind told her it had only been minutes. The Texas panhandle stretched in every direction like a punishment, flat and merciless, offering no shelter, no kindness, no quarter against the black wall of weather that had descended from the north with the speed and fury of something divine and wrathful. The funnel had not yet fully formed, but she could hear it in the way the air screamed around her ears, could feel it in the vacuum that sucked the breath from her lungs and made her eyes water. The cattle were long gone, scattered into the bruised horizon. The wagon was overturned a quarter-mile behind her, one wheel still spinning lazily in the dirt, and Caroline was alone, until she was not. He came out of the chaos like something conjured, a massive dark figure on an equally dark horse, cutting through the curtain of debris and screaming wind with a single-minded intensity that should have frightened her, and instead made her knees buckle with relief. The horse skidded to a stop not 3 feet from where she stood, and the man was off the saddle before the animal had fully stilled, his boots hitting the hardpan with a crack that she felt in her spine. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a jaw like something cut from limestone and eyes the color of a sky that was about to change everything. He grabbed her, both hands on her arms, and the strength of his grip was not gentle, but it was certain, and certainty was all she had left to hold on to. The funnel dropped from the clouds behind him. It was real now. Not a threat, not a possibility. A writhing black column that tore at the earth and made a sound like every train she had ever heard compressed into one single, terrible note. And this man, this stranger whose name she did not yet know, pulled her against his chest and turned his body so that he stood between her and the storm, and he put his mouth close to her ear so she could hear him above the apocalypse of wind, and he said words that she would carry with her for the rest of her life. "I have got you. Do not let go." She grabbed the front of his coat with both hands, and she did not let go. 3 weeks earlier, Caroline Abbott had been standing on the platform of the Amarillo train station in the unforgiving heat of August, 1882, with 2 leather traveling cases, $32 folded into the lining of her corset, and a letter of employment that she had read so many times the paper had gone soft at the folds. She was 26 years old, which the women in her home city of St. Louis considered nearly catastrophic for a woman still unmarried. She had brown hair that refused to stay pinned, green eyes that her mother called too direct for a lady, and a backbone that her father had called her finest quality before he died, and left her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a debt she could not name. The letter was from a man named Harlan Jessup, owner of the Double Bar J Ranch outside a small town called Crestwater, Texas. He needed a bookkeeper. He needed someone who could manage accounts and correspondence, who could deal with suppliers without being cheated, who could bring some order to the financial chaos his foreman had described in barely legible script. He was offering room, board, and a wage that made Caroline's head swim when she considered it against the alternative, which was taking in laundry in St. Louis until she died of boredom or humiliation. She had not hesitated. What she had not anticipated was that Crestwater would be 40 miles from Amarillo by road, that the stage would run twice a week and she had just missed it, and that the man she had arranged to meet her, a hired driver named Pollard who worked for Jessup, would not be at the station at all. She stood in the heat with her cases and her letter and her $32, and tried very hard not to feel like she had made a catastrophic mistake. "You look lost." The voice was low, a little rough, not unkind. She turned and found a man leaning against the station wall with the particular ease of someone who had never in his life felt like he did not belong somewhere. He was somewhere around 30, she estimated, with dark brown hair cut practically short and a week's worth of stubble that he wore without apology. His clothes were working clothes, worn in all the places work wore clothes, but his hat was good quality and his boots were better. He had a cattleman's build, the kind of lean, dense strength that came from doing actual physical labor rather than trying to imitate it. "I am not lost," Caroline said, which was mostly true. "I am waiting." "For Pollard," she blinked. "You know him, know of him. He had a disagreement with a fence post last night, broke his wrist." The man pushed off the wall and straightened to his full height, which was considerable. "He sent word to Jessup this morning. Are you the bookkeeper?" "I am." She drew herself up. "Caroline Abbott." He held out his hand, and she noticed it was calloused and scarred but perfectly steady. "Micah Carver." "I run the Carver spread about 8 miles from the double bar. I was in Amarillo on business, and Jessup asked me to bring you through since I was passing anyway." Caroline looked at him for a moment, then at his horse, tied to the hitching post at the station's edge. "A single horse, no wagon." "There is only one horse," she said. "My wagon is at the livery getting a wheel fixed. We can collect it in an hour." She felt a flush of embarrassment at her own assumption and covered it by reaching for her cases. He moved before she could, picking up both with a single motion that made it look effortless. She let him because arguing about it seemed like a waste of everyone's time. They sat in the shade of the station while they waited for the wagon, and because Caroline Abbott had never in her life been comfortable with silence when there were things worth knowing, she asked him about Jessup, about Crestwater, about the land she was about to make her home. Micah Carver answered everything plainly and without embellishment. He told her Jessup was a fair man but overwhelmed, that his last 2 bookkeepers had left within a season because the isolation got to them, that Crestwater was a town of about 300 people and growing, that the land was hard and beautiful in ways that took some getting used to. "And you?" she asked. "How long have you been here?" He looked at her sideways. 12 years. "I came out of Tennessee when I was 18 with 1 horse and $3. And now, 15,000 acres and 1,200 head of cattle." She studied him. "You built that yourself." It was not a question. He answered it anyway. "Every inch of it." There was no pride in how he said it, just fact, which she respected far more than pride would have earned. She told him she had come from St. Louis. He did not ask about family, which she appreciated, because the answer was complicated and she was not yet ready to lay it out for a stranger. He told her the summer had been dry, and the ranchers were watching the sky with the particular anxiety of people who understood exactly how thin the margin was between a good year and a devastating one. "There is talk of a bad storm season," he said, looking at the horizon with the practiced squint of a man who read weather for a living. "Late summer, early fall. The kind of storms that come up fast and mean it." "I grew up in tornado country," Caroline said. "I know how to read a sky." He looked at her with something that might have been the very beginning of respect. "Good," he said simply. The wagon was ready within the hour, and they loaded her cases and set off south toward Crestwater. The land opened up around them as they left Amarillo behind, the kind of landscape that was either magnificent or oppressive depending on your relationship with space. Caroline looked at it and felt something loosen in her chest, some compressed thing that had been living behind her sternum since her father's funeral, since the creditors, since the cramped boarding house room in St. Louis, where she had spent 6 months planning a different life. This was a different life. She was going to be good at it. Micah Carver drove with the easy competence of a man who had driven 1,000 miles of this road in his mind before he ever drove it in his body. He did not try to fill the silences with noise. He pointed out things she should know: a dry creek bed that flooded fast when it rained, a cluster of mesquite that marked where a well could be dug if you needed it, a particular red outcropping of rock that meant you were 10 miles from Crestwater. He taught her the land as they crossed it, and she absorbed everything because that was how she was built. They arrived in Crestwater as the sun was going horizontal, painting everything amber and copper. The town was exactly as he had described it, a main street of false-fronted buildings, a church, a bank, a general store, a hotel that doubled as a saloon after 6 in the evening. It smelled of horses and dust and wood smoke and something that might have been ambition, that particularly American smell of people building something from nothing. Jessup met them at the edge of his property, a wide-shouldered man of 50 with kind eyes and a rancher's sunburnt neck. He shook Caroline's hand with genuine warmth and showed her the room she would have in the main house, small but her own, with a window that faced east and caught the morning light. She unpacked her 2 cases and stood at that window looking out at the Carver spread in the middle distance, at the lights that were just coming on in what she assumed was the main house, and she thought about dark eyes and plain speech and 12 years of building something from almost nothing. Then she put that thought away and unpacked her ledger books. The first week at the Double Bar Jay taught Caroline several important things. The accounts were a disaster, not through fraud but through sheer chaos, through years of Jessup recording numbers in 3 different systems, none of which communicated with the others, through supplier invoices stuffed in coffee cans, through cattle prices written on the backs of letters, and then used as kindling. She worked from before dawn to after dark, and she made order from the chaos with the systematic pleasure of someone who genuinely loved this kind of problem. She also learned that Micah Carver was at the Double Bar Jay more often than strictly business required. He came by twice that first week, once to discuss a shared water rights issue with Jessup, and once for no reason she could identify, arriving at the supper hour and accepting an invitation to eat with the easy grace of a man who was accustomed to being invited. He sat at the table and ate Jessup's cook's beef stew and talked cattle prices and rainfall and railroad expansion, and twice during the meal he looked at Caroline across the table, and she had the particular sensation of being read, of someone paying attention in a way that was not casual. She paid attention back. He was not a soft man. There was nothing about Micah Carver that invited easy categorization or comfortable assumptions. He had opinions and he held them without apology, but he listened when someone countered them, actually listened, and she watched him change his position twice during those conversations based on new information Jessup provided. That was rarer than almost any other quality she could think of. She had known men her whole life who held their opinions like territory, defending them not because they believed in them, but because surrender felt like weakness. Micah Carver was not afraid of being wrong. She found that almost impossibly attractive and told herself sternly that she had come to Texas to work. The second week brought a problem that required her to actually visit the Carver spread. There was a shared account between the 2 ranches, an old arrangement Jessup could not fully explain, relating to grazing rights and water access that had been set up by Jessup's father and Micah's predecessor. She needed to see the original documents, which Micah kept in his office. She rode over on one of Jessup's horses on a Tuesday morning, and for the first time she saw the Carver spread from the inside rather than the outside. It was impressive in a way that was not about grandeur but about competence, every building in good repair, every fence straight, the cattle she passed on the ride in sleek and well-fed. The main house was larger than she had expected, built of good timber and native stone, with a wide porch that faced both east and south. It was the house of a man who had planned to share it and had not yet found the right person to share it with. She did not know why that thought arrived with such clarity. Micah met her at the porch. He had been working in the yard and there was dust on his forearms, and his sleeves were rolled up, and she found herself making a study of his hands before she caught herself at it. "Come in," he said. "I have the documents in the office." The office was lined with shelves of account books, and there was a desk buried under papers that told her his financial organization was only somewhat better than Jessup's. She noticed him notice her looking at the desk, and something crossed his face that might have been embarrassment. "I know," he said. "It is not my business," she said. "No." He pulled the relevant documents from a drawer, at least those were organized. "But if you have suggestions, I would hear them." She looked at him. "That is not in my employment agreement. I know that too." She took the documents and sat at his desk and spent 2 hours working through them while he worked at a secondary table across the room, doing correspondence. They did not talk much, but the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who were comfortable in their own minds, and found that quality in each other pleasant rather than alienating. At one point she asked a question about a specific grazing boundary, and he answered it without looking up from his writing, and they went back to their respective work, and she thought, this is what it would feel like. She did not complete the thought. She took the documents she needed and rode back to the double barge and worked until the candle burned down. The next week he came to Jessup's for supper again, and afterward, when the sky had gone fully dark and the stars were doing what they did out here, which was everything, he walked her from the main house to the side entrance she used, and they stood for a moment at the door, and he said, "You are good at your work." "I know," she said, which was honest. He almost smiled. Almost. "That was not easy for you to say, was it?" "It was perfectly easy. I have no patience for false modesty." "Good." He put his hat back on his head, which he had been holding. "Neither do I." He walked back to his horse, and she stood at the door and watched him go, and told herself for the third time that she had come to Texas to work. There was a man in Crestwater named Dale Sutter who began to make her nervous during the third week. He was Jessup's nearest neighbor to the west, a thin man with a smile that arrived before the warmth that should have accompanied it, a rancher of some 30 years who had not prospered as he felt he should have, and who attributed this to everyone but himself. He came to the double barge on a pretext about a strayed calf, and he spent most of his visit finding reasons to be near Caroline, to ask her questions about the accounts, to look at papers she was working on. She was careful. She was always careful. She said nothing and revealed nothing and waited until he left to go directly to Jessup. "Tell me about Sutter," she said. Jessup's expression went complicated. He set down his coffee cup. "He is a neighbor. He was looking at my work today. He asked me questions about the ranch's finances that were not his business to ask." Jessup was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "There has been some trouble with the water rights between my land and Sutter's. There is a spring on the south boundary that we both have historical claim to. It has been in dispute for 2 years. He thinks he can find something in the accounts to use against you." Jessup spread his hands. "He is desperate. His cattle are underwatered and his ranch is in decline. I do not think he is a bad man, but I think he is a frightened one, and frightened men do things." "I will be careful with the documents," she said. She was more than careful. She reorganized the filing system so that anything related to the water rights was under a different classification. Locked in the cabinet she had been given a key to. She was thorough and she was discreet, and she noted that Sutter came by twice more in the following week, each time with a different pretext, and each time seemed mildly frustrated by how little he could see. She told Micah about it when he came for supper on Thursday. She had not planned to tell him. It was not his business. But he asked how she was finding the work, and she said fine, and then she said, "There is a man named Sutter who concerns me," and she explained what she had observed, and he listened with his full attention, the way he always did, and when she was done he was quiet for a moment. "Sutter has been trying to get access to Jessup's accounts for 2 years, Micah said. "He believes there is a documentation error in the water rights agreement, something he can exploit. He tried to get the previous bookkeeper to share information. The bookkeeper refused and left shortly after, though I suspect the isolation was genuinely also a factor." Caroline absorbed this. "You should have told me. It was not my place. You are Jessup's employee, not mine." She considered taking offense at this and decided it was actually fair. "Then Jessup should have told me." "Yes," Micah agreed. "He should have." She looked across the table at Jessup, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I am sorry, Miss Abbott. I did not want to alarm you before you had settled in." "Being alarmed appropriately is better than being ignorant dangerously," she said. "I can handle Sutter, but I need to know what I am handling." From that evening forward, Jessup told her everything, and she understood the situation in full. The water rights were genuinely complex. The original agreement written in 1871, when the territory was barely organized, and there were ambiguities that a good lawyer could work on from either side. She spent 2 days reading every document she could find, and came to the conclusion that Jessup's claim was stronger, but only if properly documented and presented. She wrote a letter to a land attorney in Amarillo. Micah heard about the letter and came to the Double Bar J specifically to talk about it. "You are getting ahead of yourself," he said, not unkindly, in the doorway of the office she had claimed as her workspace. "I am getting ahead of Sutter," she corrected. "There is a difference." He leaned against the doorframe and looked at her for a long moment. "You are not just a bookkeeper." "I am exactly a bookkeeper. I am also a woman with common sense." "Those are not contradictory." "No," she said. "They are not." He was quiet again. Then, "The attorney in Amarillo is a good choice. His name is Forsyth. Tell him Micah Carver recommended him. He will take the case seriously." She wrote Forsyth's name in her notebook. "Thank you. You are welcome." He did not move from the doorframe. "Are you eating supper here tonight?" "I live here," she pointed out. "I meant, will you be at the supper table or eating at your desk?" She looked at him. He looked back. She became aware with a sudden and somewhat inconvenient clarity that she had been looking forward to Thursday supper since Tuesday. "The table," she said. He pushed off the doorframe and straightened. "Good." He stayed for supper, and then stayed past supper while the evening cooled down and Jessup fell asleep in his chair by the stove, the way old men do when they are comfortable and among people they trust. Caroline and Micah sat on the porch in the dark, and she told him about St. Louis in a way she had not told anyone, about her father's business and its collapse, about the debts that had eaten the house, and then the furniture, and then the last of the dignity, about the 6 months in the boarding house working as a typist for a law firm, and learning that she was very good at the administrative mechanics of other people's problems. He listened without offering comfort he did not mean or advice she had not asked for. Then he told her about Tennessee, and she understood from the way he told it that it had not been simple. His father had been a difficult man, not cruel exactly, but defined by a kind of grinding disappointment that had no particular object and so attached itself to everyone near him. Micah had left at 18 not because there was something wonderful waiting for him in Texas, but because there was nothing left for him to do in Tennessee except become that disappointment. "Were you afraid?" she asked. "Terrified," he said. "The whole first year I woke up every morning and thought I had made a catastrophic mistake. What changed?" The land started working. He looked out at the dark. When the first cattle were healthy through a winter, when the first fencing was done, when the first season's accounting showed I was not losing money faster than I was making it. He paused. The work changed it, having something to build. She thought about her ledger books, about the pleasure she took in a column of figures that balanced in a chaotic system made orderly. "I understand that," she said. "I thought you would." They sat in the comfortable dark for a while longer, and when she finally said she should turn in and he stood to go, she had the very specific sensation of not wanting him to leave. She had had that sensation about men before. She had never before trusted it. This time, quietly, carefully, she allowed herself to trust it a little. The 4th week brought the beginning of the trouble she had not anticipated. A man rode into Crestwater from the east with a letter that he delivered personally to Harlan Jessup. She was in the office when Jessup read it, and she heard him go very still in the next room, the particular stillness of a person receiving bad news. She did not intrude. When he came to her office 20 minutes later, his face was composed, but his eyes were doing something complicated. "I have a son," he said, "in Kansas. I have not seen him in 15 years. She waited. "He is coming." Jessup sat down in the chair across from her desk. "He says he wants to reconcile. He says he wants to help run the ranch." "Is that good?" she asked carefully. Jessup looked at his hands. "Theodore is my son and I love him. He is also a man who has made choices I do not understand and done things I cannot explain, and he has a talent for finding the most complicated solution to every simple problem." Caroline thought about the accounts, about how long it had taken to unsnarl them, about the careful system she had built. "I will keep everything secure," she said. Jessup looked at her with profound gratitude. "I knew you would." Theodore Jessup arrived 3 days later on the afternoon stage. He was about 30, with his father's broad shoulders but none of his father's stillness, a man made of restless energy and quick talk, and the particular social fluency of someone who had spent time charming his way through difficult situations. He had a handsome face and knew it. He shook Caroline's hand with both of his and held it a beat too long and looked at her with frank appreciation that she noted without returning. "Father's bookkeeper," he said. "I have heard the accounts are finally making sense." "They are," she said. "Impressive work." He was still holding her hand. She extracted it. "Thank you." He was charming at supper and charming the next day and charming every day, and the charm never quite covered the thing underneath, which was that he was looking at everything, assessing everything, the land and the accounts and the position of the ranch. He asked questions that were too specific to be casual. He proposed changes that sounded reasonable on the surface, and she could see, 3 steps ahead, how they would create openings. Openings for what, she was not yet certain. Micah came by on Thursday, and she watched Theodore watch Micah, and she saw something click into place behind Theodore's eyes, something that looked like calculation. "You are Carver," Theodore said. "I am," Micah said. He shook Theodore's hand and said nothing more. He had the useful quality of being able to say nothing in a way that revealed nothing. At the table, Theodore talked about the water rights dispute in a way that sounded like he was brainstorming helpfully, but that had the effect of putting all the relevant information in the air where anyone at the table could absorb it. Caroline noticed Micah noticing this too. She caught his eye across the table, and something passed between them that required no words. Later, walking to her door, she said quietly, "He has been in contact with Sutter." Micah was very still. "How do you know?" He used a phrase about the spring boundary that is specific. It is the same phrase in a letter Sutter sent to Jessup 6 months ago. "I read all the correspondence." She paused. Jessup did not notice. "Jessup loves his son." Yes, she said it without judgment. Love made people selectively perceptive. She understood that. "What do you want to do?" he asked. She liked that he asked that. He did not assume he should be the one to decide. "I want to continue being careful and watchful. I want to document everything Theodore says about the accounts, and I want to make sure that when Sutter makes his move, whatever it is, we are ready." "We," he said quietly. She became aware that she had said that. She did not take it back. "We," she confirmed. He looked at her for a long moment, and in the Texas dark with the stars doing their overwhelming thing above them, something shifted between them, something that had been building since the train station platform and the shade outside the livery and the supper tables and the porch in the dark. She felt it like a change in pressure, like the air before a storm. "I will be here," he said. "Whatever you need." "I know," she said. He left, and she stood at the door for a long time before she went inside. The following week confirmed her suspicions about Theodore and raised new questions about the depth of the scheme. A meeting was arranged between Jessup and Sutter regarding the water rights, ostensibly a neighborly conversation to see if the dispute could be resolved without legal involvement. Theodore had suggested it. He framed it as a gesture of good faith, as an olive branch. Caroline prepared for it by having everything already in the attorney Forsyth's hands in Amarillo. She had ridden to the telegraph office in Crestwater herself and sent a wire, and received one back from Forsyth saying he had reviewed the documents and that Jessup's claim was strong, legally sound, and that any agreement made without counsel present would not be binding if challenged. She put that telegram in her pocket and sat in on the meeting with the quiet confidence of someone holding a good hand. Sutter came with his foreman and a man she did not know who turned out to be his own attorney, a development that made Jessup go pale. Theodore welcomed Sutter's attorney with a warmth that confirmed everything Caroline had already concluded. She let the meeting proceed for 20 minutes, let Sutter's attorney lay out an argument that was genuinely clever, a reinterpretation of the 1871 agreement that would have given Sutter priority access to the spring. Then she placed Forsyth's assessment on the table. The silence was remarkable. "You have already engaged counsel," Sutter said. He was looking at her with something between fury and an unwilling respect. "Several days ago," she said. Mr. Forsyth is prepared to file in Amarillo should this dispute proceed to that level. He has indicated that the original agreement, properly read in the context of territorial land law as it was understood in 1871, clearly establishes Mr. Jessup's claim as primary. She looked at Theodore, and I would be interested to know the nature of the communication between yourself and Mr. Sutter that preceded this meeting. Theodore's charm went very thin. I do not know what you are suggesting. I am not suggesting, I am asking a direct question. Jessup looked at his son, and his expression was the most painful thing in the room. Theodore. The name said everything. Theodore left the table, and the meeting ended without an agreement, and Sutter rode home with his attorney and the carefully prepared argument he had not been able to use. He looked back once as he rode out, at Caroline, and she met his gaze without flinching. That evening Jessup talked to his son for 3 hours behind the closed office door. Caroline sat in her room and read and did not listen, though the house was not large and silence was not what came through the walls. When it was over, Theodore came out looking like a man who had been taken apart and reassembled, and was not yet sure the pieces were all in the right places. He found Caroline in the hallway. "You are very good at your job," he said. His charm was entirely gone now, and what remained was something more genuine if less comfortable. "I know," she said. "My father trusts you. He does." Theodore was quiet for a moment. "I should not have involved Sutter. I thought I was being clever and I was being disloyal." He said this flatly, without the self-justification that would have made it easier for him to bear and less meaningful for her to hear. "You should tell your father that," she said. "I just did." She studied him. Beneath the restlessness and the calculation there was a man who might be worth something if he was pointed in a useful direction. "There is actual work to be done here," she said. "If you want to help your father, I can show you what needs doing." Theodore looked surprised. Then slowly he nodded. They spent the next 3 days working through the accounts together, she teaching him the systems, he contributing a working knowledge of cattle trading that was genuinely useful. She revised her estimation of him upward somewhat. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had spent too long looking for shortcuts through problems that required patience. She understood that too. She had spent 6 months in a boarding house learning the same lesson. Micah came by on Thursday and found her and Theodore at the office table with papers spread between them, and laughed for what she thought might be the first time she had heard. A real laugh, low and surprised. "You drafted him," he said. "He volunteered," she said. Theodore looked up with the expression of a man who is realizing he has been handled and is not entirely sure how. "She is an extremely organized person," he told Micah. "I noticed," Micah said. He was still looking at Caroline with that laughter in his eyes, and she felt it like sunshine on her face after a long winter. They stayed for supper, all 3 of them plus Jessup, and it was the best evening she had had since arriving in Texas. Theodore was funny when he was not performing charm, genuinely funny, with a dry humor that she appreciated. Jessup was softer than he had been in weeks. Micah ate 2 helpings of the apple cake the cook had made and then looked faintly guilty about it, and Caroline found this so endearing that she had to look at her plate. After supper, Micah walked her to her door and stood for a moment on the step and said, "You handled Sutter." "Forsyth handled Sutter. I just made the introduction. You anticipated the problem and prepared for it before anyone else knew it was coming." He paused. "I have worked with a lot of people, Miss Abbott. I have not met many with your particular combination of qualities." She looked up at him. The porch light made everything amber. "What qualities are those?" He was quiet for a moment, as he always was before he said something he meant. "Intelligence, courage, patience, the understanding that most problems are solved by preparation before they arrive rather than reaction after they do." She felt the words land with a precision that had nothing to do with professional respect and everything to do with something more personal. "Micah," she said. It was the first time she had used his given name without a context that required it. He heard it. She could tell by the way he went still. "Caroline," he said back, and it was a test and an acknowledgement at once. "It is a nice evening," she said. Would you like to sit on the porch for a while?" He sat on the porch for 2 hours, and they talked about everything and nothing. And when he finally left, the moon was high and the coyotes were singing to each other across the dark, and she sat at her window for a long time before she slept. The 5th week was when the weather started talking. She noticed at first the way he had said she would, in the quality of the sky at evening, in the way the air felt thick and undecided, in the strange stillness of the afternoons that felt less like peace and more like held breath. The cattle were restless, the horses were restless, even the mockingbirds, which usually sang all day and half the night, had gone quiet. Micah came by on Monday, not Thursday, which was unusual enough to make Jessup raise his eyebrows. "The sky is doing something," Micah said to her without preamble on the porch where she had been looking at exactly that sky. "I know," she said. "The barometer at the Crestwater General Store dropped 12 points overnight." She looked at the horizon to the north, where a line of clouds was building that had the particular purple-black color of serious intent. How much time? Could be days. Could be hours. In this country with a system this size, you genuinely cannot tell until it is almost on you. He turned to her. "You should know where the storm shelter is." Jessup showed me. "You should know more than one shelter. On the road between here and Crestwater there is a creek bed that drops about 4 feet below ground level, a natural cut. If you are ever caught in the open and cannot get to shelter, get to that cut and lie flat." She filed this information away carefully. "Is it safe to still be moving cattle? The Double Bar J had a planned drive to the south pasture this week. Jessup is going to cancel it. I came to tell him." She followed him inside where he told Jessup, and Jessup agreed with the immediate practicality of a man who had seen bad weather before. The drive was postponed. The hands were put to work securing buildings and checking the shelter. The storm did not come that day or the next. By Wednesday the air had a strange quality, electric and dense, that made the hair on her arms rise when she stood outdoors. Clouds built in the north and the west and hung there like a judgment. She saw her first lightning, distant and silent, on Wednesday night from her window. Thursday morning she rode to Crestwater to pick up correspondence from the post office, because the mail had been delayed and the attorney Forsyth had a document she was waiting on. It was a 5-mile ride on a good road, and she had ridden it half a dozen times now. She went early, collected the mail, and was heading back with the relevant document tucked inside her coat when the sky changed. Not gradually. The line of clouds to the northwest had been building all morning, and she had been watching it with the careful attention Micah had said she should develop, reading it the way you read a letter from someone you have learned to take seriously. But the shift, when it came, was not gradual. One moment the clouds were a concern, and the next moment they were a declaration, and the green-black color that replaced the morning's blue was the particular shade she knew from childhood, from stories her father had told, from a summer in Missouri when she was 12, and had watched a funnel set down 2 fields away and tear 3 barns apart. She turned her horse south and asked for everything the animal had. The wind picked up within minutes, the kind of wind that does not care about direction, that seems to come from everywhere at once. Dust rose in curtains from the flat ground, and she bent low over the horse's neck and kept her eyes on the road ahead. She was 2 miles from the Double Bar J. She could make it. She had made hard rides before. Then her horse threw a shoe. The animal stumbled, recovered, stumbled again, and she felt the uneven gait through her whole body and knew she could not push the horse hard on a bad foot, not on this ground. She pulled up and assessed the situation with the same clear-eyed practicality she brought to everything. The road was exposed. The Double Bar J was still 2 miles south. The storm was coming from the northwest at a speed that made her chest tight. Ahead of her, about a 1/4 mile east, was the creek bed that Micah had described. She turned east. She was 100 yards from the creek when the wagon rocked past her, the Double Bar J's supply wagon running back toward the ranch with the horses at full panic, the driver fighting them with everything he had and not quite winning. She pulled her own horse out of the way, and the wagon hit a rut and went sideways and rolled, the horses screaming and the driver thrown clear. She turned toward the driver, who was sitting up and shaking his head, dazed but apparently not broken. She helped him to his feet. "The creek," she said, "a quarter-mile east. Can you walk?" "Yes," he said. They started east together, her horse walking unevenly beside them. The wind was extraordinary now, a physical force that required leaning into. Debris flew past, fence boards and dry grass and things she could not identify. The sky was the color of a bruise and the light had gone wrong, that peculiar greenish dimness that meant the air above was doing something catastrophic. She could see the creek cut now, 20 yards ahead. She could also see the funnel. It was to the northwest, maybe a mile, touching down in an ugly churning mass that threw dirt and debris in every direction, and made a sound that she understood for the first time was not a metaphor when people called it a roar. It was a roar. It was the roar of everything being taken apart at once. She shoved the wagon driver forward. "Go, get into the cut and lie flat." He ran. She turned to her horse, intending to move the animal off the road, and that is when she realized she could not get both herself and the horse to the creek in time. She made the calculation in about half a second, let the horse's reins go, pushed the animal south, and turned back toward the creek. She was running when she heard hoofbeats behind her. She turned and he came out of the storm. It was exactly as she would later try to describe it and fail, because the words available for it were all too small. He came at a dead gallop through the debris-filled wind, bent over his horse's neck with the purpose of a man who has made a decision and is not reconsidering it. And he had to have known she was here because nobody rode toward a tornado on purpose without a reason. He had seen her from the road, or seen her horse, or known in some other way she could not account for. He came off the horse before it stopped and he grabbed her both hands and turned his body so that he stood between her and the direction the funnel was moving, and the sound was so enormous now that she could feel it in her teeth, and he put his mouth close to her ear and said the words that she would carry forever, would tell her children and her grandchildren, would remember on the last day of her life with the same precision she remembered them now. "I have got you. Do not let go." She grabbed the front of his coat with both hands, and she did not let go. He pulled her the last 20 yards to the creek at a run, pushed the driver further into the cut, and pressed her down into the dirt and covered her with his body, one arm over her shoulders and his other hand braced against the hard earth wall of the cut, and the storm went over them. She had been in storms before. She had not been in anything like this. It lasted, by her later estimate, perhaps 4 minutes. It felt like 4 years. The sound was beyond sound, a physical thing that pressed against her eardrums and her chest and made thinking nearly impossible. The air was full of debris, and she kept her face against the coat over her shoulders and breathed carefully and held on. His grip on her never loosened. His weight over her was immovable and steady in a way that her mind kept translating as safe, that part of her brain that was operating below the level of reason, the part that understood safety not as an abstract concept but as a physical fact. Then it was past. The roar faded to a scream, and the scream faded to a whistle, and the whistle faded to a wind that was merely violent rather than apocalyptic, and she became aware of small things again. The smell of churned earth, the sound of her own breathing, the weight of him still covering her. He moved carefully, lifting away, checking her face first with his hands, a quick, efficient assessment that she recognized as looking for injury. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." She sat up. "Are you?" He had a cut on his forearm where something had caught him and a significant bruise already forming on his jaw where he had hit the earth wall when the worst of it passed. "Nothing serious," he said. The wagon driver was unhurt, shaken, pressing his back against the creek wall with the expression of a man who has just renegotiated his relationship with mortality. They climbed out of the cut and looked at what the storm had done to the world. The road was scoured. Several fence posts were down across the pasture to the north. A cottonwood tree that had been standing 100 feet from the creek was simply gone. The funnel had tracked about 300 yards south of where they were lying, close enough that she could see the path it had torn through the earth, a track of devastated ground that showed exactly what kind of force they had just hidden from. She looked at that track for a long moment. Then she looked at Micah. He was looking at her. His hat was gone. His hair was full of dust, and his jaw was bruising, and his shirt was torn at the shoulder, and he was the most solidly present thing she had ever seen in her life. "You rode toward it," she said. "I saw your horse on the road without a rider. You rode toward a tornado. You were somewhere between me and it." He said this as if it were a simple equation that had a single solution. She thought about what she wanted to say and could not find anything that was adequate, so she did what she had never in her life done on a few weeks of knowing someone. She stepped forward and put her arms around him and pressed her face against his chest and held on. He wrapped his arms around her and held on back, and they stood in the wrecked landscape with the wind still moving around them, and the sky beginning to lighten in the way that skies do after they have done their worst, and she could feel his heartbeat, which was rapid and not entirely steady, and she understood that the certainty she had felt coming off him throughout that ordeal had been chosen, not automatic. He had been afraid, and he had done it anyway. "Thank you," she said into his shirt. His arms tightened briefly around her. "I told you not to let go." "I did not let go," she said. He laughed, the same surprised, genuine laugh she had heard only once before, and she felt it rumble through his chest against her cheek. They eventually separated and dealt with the practical things, checking the wagon driver's condition, walking back to find the horse she had released, which had found its way south and was standing in a fence corner unhurt, one hoof raised. They walked back to the double bar, Jay leading the horse, which was a long walk and a good one, and they talked about everything except the thing that had just changed between them, because it did not need to be talked about yet. It needed to be lived in for a while first. The ranch had minor damage. A barn roof was partially lifted. Several fence sections were down. The storm shelter had performed as designed. Everyone was accounted for, which was the only number that mattered. Jessup hugged her when she came in, which surprised her, and then shook Micah's hand for a long time, and Theodore, who had apparently spent the last hour being genuinely terrified on her behalf, stood in the doorway with an expression that had permanently replaced the performing charm with something more earnest. "I am glad you are both all right," Theodore said. "So are we," Micah said. She stayed in that evening, which was the first evening in a week she had not spent at least an hour on the porch, and she sat at her desk and looked at her ledger books without seeing them for a while before she allowed herself to simply think about what she felt. She was 26 years old and had come to Texas to build a new life, and somewhere between the train station and the storm she had fallen in love with Micah Carver. This was not a small or tentative or experimental feeling. It was the kind of feeling that arrived with the full weight of certainty, the same certainty she recognized from his grip in the creek cut. This was not a maybe. She let herself know it completely, and then she closed the ledger and made tea and went to bed. The next morning he was at the double bar J before 7. This was not unusual, but the expression on his face was, and Jessup, who was a perceptive man when he was paying attention, found a reason to be in the far barn within 5 minutes of Micah's arrival. They were alone in the kitchen with coffee and the morning light coming in from the east window. "I need to say something," Micah said. "All right," she said. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and looked at them, and she realized he was choosing his words with the same care he brought to everything, which was considerable. She waited with patience she genuinely had rather than patience she was performing. "I have been coming to this ranch for supper more often than business requires," he said. "I think you know that." "Yes," she said. "I think the reason has been clear for a while." "To me as well," she said. He looked up at her. "I am not a man who makes speeches. I am not certain I could adequately describe what I feel in language that matches it. But I would like to ask if I might have the right to try to deserve what I think is here between us." She considered this formulation carefully. It was not, strictly speaking, a declaration or a proposal. It was something more honest than either, an acknowledgement of something real and a request for the opportunity to meet it properly. Yes, she said. He absorbed that. Then slowly, something happened to his face that she had not seen before, a softening, a warming, as if something that had been held very still for a very long time had decided it could move. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She turned her hand over so that they were palm to palm, and they sat like that in the morning light for a while, just that, just this, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was extraordinary. Over the next month he came every Thursday, but also most Tuesdays and the occasional Monday, and the pretexts became thinner and more transparent until they stopped pretending there were pretexts. He came because she was there, and he wanted to be where she was, and she received this plainly and happily because she wanted exactly the same thing. They rode together on Sundays, which was her one day away from the accounts, riding the land in the long light while he told her things about it, and she stored them the way she stored everything, carefully, and with the intention of using them. He showed her the spring that was at the center of the water rights dispute, a clear, strong source in the limestone that served both ranches. She looked at it with the eye of someone who had read the 1871 agreement very carefully and said, "It should serve both. The agreement does not need to favor one over the other. It needs to be renegotiated to recognize that both ranches have legitimate needs." He looked at her. "If you suggest that to Jessup and he agrees, and they approach Sutter with a cooperative framework rather than a competitive one, Sutter's legal claim becomes irrelevant." "That is the idea," she said. She saw him process this, saw the moment he recognized how elegant it was. "You have been thinking about this for weeks." "I have been waiting for the right moment," she said. He shook his head slowly. "You are extraordinary." She felt the word go through her, warm and uncomplicated. "I know," she said, and he laughed and she laughed, and the spring caught the light between them and the horses drank from it peacefully. She presented the cooperative water rights framework to Jessup and Sutter together, with Micah as witness, at the end of September. The attorney Forsyth drafted the new agreement, which guaranteed both ranches proportional access to the spring based on seasonal need, with a dispute resolution process that did not require courts. Sutter, who had been in a defensive posture so long he had forgotten what it felt like not to be fighting, sat with the new document for a long time before he signed it. "This is fair," he said finally. It seemed to surprise him. "That was the goal," Caroline said. Theodore Jessup, who by this point had become something of an ally, had been instrumental in getting his father to agree to the new framework. He had spent the past month doing actual work on the ranch, and discovering that he was good at parts of it, specifically the trading and negotiation side, which his father had always found exhausting and which Theodore found energizing. He and Caroline had reached a steady professional understanding, and she had begun to think that his arrival, which had seemed like a threat, might turn out to be the best thing for the long-term stability of the double-bar J life, had a quality she associated with the word she had not let herself use too often. Good. It was good. She had her work and her window that caught the morning light and her ledger books in satisfying order, and a town she was beginning to know, the people in it, their names and histories and needs. She knew Mr. Abernathy at the general store and his wife who made quilts. She knew the minister and his quiet wife who taught the children. She knew the woman at the post office who read all the newspapers before distributing them, and had the best analysis of national events Caroline had encountered outside of St. Louis. She was becoming part of a place, which was different from simply being in one. And she had Micah, who rode with her on Sundays and sat across supper tables on Thursdays and Tuesdays and the occasional Monday, and who said her name in a particular way that made her understand it afresh every time, like a word she kept discovering the full meaning of. In October, on a Sunday afternoon when the sky was the blue of impossible clarity, and the air had the first edge of cool that meant the season was turning, they were sitting on a flat rock above the creek where she had survived the storm, looking at the country spread out below them, and he said, I would like to ask you something." She turned to look at him. He was looking at the view, but she could see him composing himself, and the sight of Micah Carver, who faced everything else in his life with steady confidence, being careful with his words about this particular thing, made her chest ache with affection. "Ask," she said. He turned to her. "I built that house for someone," he said. "I did not know who for a long time. I built it with the intention of sharing it, and I have not yet managed that." He stopped. Then, "I would very much like to share it with you, if you would have me, if you would consider it." She looked at him for a long moment, at the limestone jaw and the dark eyes and the 12 years of building something from almost nothing, at the man who had ridden toward a tornado because she might be somewhere between him and it, at the man who listened and changed his mind and told the truth and meant what he said. "Yes," she said, "I would consider it. I am considering it right now, and the answer is yes." The light that came into his face was worth every complicated mile she had traveled to get here. He took both her hands in his and held them, and they sat on the rock above the creek in the October afternoon, and the country lay around them like a promise that had been kept. They were married in the Crestwater Church in November, on a Saturday when the sky was clear and cold, and the whole town came, because a town of 300 people does not often have a wedding between two of its most interesting citizens, and they were not going to miss it. The minister read the words and they said their vows, and Caroline did not waver on a single syllable because she meant all of them entirely, and Micah held her hands and looked at her with an expression that the women in the church would talk about for years as the most direct and uncomplicated declaration of love they had ever witnessed on a man's face. Jessup cried. He did not apologize for it. Theodore, standing at Micah's side, looked at his father with fond exasperation and handed him a handkerchief. Afterward there was food and dancing in the church hall, and Caroline danced with Micah twice, and with Jessup, and with Theodore, and with Mr. Abernathy, and with the minister, and she did not stop smiling for 4 hours straight, which she noted privately was unprecedented in her adult life. They rode to the Carver house as the afternoon cooled, her horse alongside his, her 2 leather traveling cases now strapped to his saddle alongside his own gear. She stood on the porch of the house she was moving into and looked at the view it commanded, the spread of the land, the lights of the double bar J visible in the middle distance, and she thought about a train platform in Amarillo and a stranger leaning against a station wall who had said she looked lost. "I was not lost," she said aloud. Micah was behind her. He put his hands on her shoulders and looked out over the same view. "I know," he said. "You were finding your way." She turned to face him. "There is a difference." "Yes," he said. "There is." She stood on the porch of her house in the November twilight and kissed her husband for the first time as his wife, and the coyotes sang and the stars began their impossible show, and the wind came across the panhandle warm and easy, nothing like a storm at all. The winter of 1882 into 1883 was the kind of winter that tested everything and found it sufficient. The cold came hard in December, and the ranch hands worked in conditions that required every piece of warm clothing anyone possessed, and Caroline ran the accounts for both the Carver spread, and, in a new arrangement she had negotiated with Jessup, continued her bookkeeping work for the double bar J on a reduced schedule. She had told Jessup plainly that Theodore was now capable of managing the simpler accounting tasks, which was true, and that she would continue to handle the more complex financial matters and correspondence, which suited everyone. She set up her office in the east-facing room of the Carver house, the one that caught the morning light, because she and Micah had looked at every room together and he had said simply, "Where would you like to work?" And she had pointed to that room, and he had moved a perfectly serviceable desk out of it and replaced it with a better one from his own office, without comment, because that was how he was. She reorganized his accounts in 3 weeks. He watched her do it with the expression of a man who is discovering that being organized is a genuine physical pleasure and had simply never experienced it before. "You should have let me do this months ago," she said one evening, tallying the winter quarter. "I did not know I needed it until I saw what you did for Jessup's books," he said. "Pride, habit," he corrected. "I had always managed alone. It did not occur to me that managing with someone better at a particular thing would be a different experience than managing with someone merely helpful." She looked up at him. "Is that a compliment?" "It is an observation," he said. "The compliment is that you are the best financial mind I have encountered outside of a bank, and even then I am not certain." She felt the warmth of being seen accurately. "Thank you." He sat across from her desk, and they worked companionably through the evening accounts, he doing correspondence she had drafted for him to review, she completing the winter ledger. And the fire burned down in the stove, and the wind moved outside, and she thought about how this specific kind of contentment was the thing she had not known she was looking for. Spring came with the particular enthusiasm of a season that has been suppressed for a while and is making up for lost time. The calving season was good, better than the previous year by Micah's assessment, and she watched him work during that period with the sustained admiration she had for anyone doing physical demanding work at the highest level. He was out before dawn and in after dark every day for 6 weeks, and he came home every evening with the particular quality of exhaustion that comes from doing necessary work well. And she made sure there was hot food, and she listened to everything. He reported about the cattle the way he listened to everything she told him about the accounts. There was a quality to their marriage that she had not expected and could not have described in advance, a kind of partnership that felt like the best version of both of them, separately good, together better. She watched Jessup and Theodore finding a similar rhythm as father and son and felt glad for it. She watched Crestwater grow through the spring, 2 new families arriving from Kansas, a new dry goods store opening across from the general store, the hotel getting a second floor added. She watched the country she had arrived in knowing nothing about become the country she was part of. In the summer she told Micah she was going to have a child. She told him at breakfast matter-of-factly, because that was how she told important things, and she watched his face go through a sequence of expressions that was completely unlike his usual composed steadiness, surprise and joy and something that might have been something very close to fear, and then joy again, enormous and unconstrained. He got up from the table and came around it and crouched in front of her chair so that he was at her level, and he took her hands and said, "Are you well? Are you healthy? Is there anything you need?" "I am perfectly well," she said. "I am going to need a doctor's confirmation and probably some adjustments to my riding in the later months, but otherwise I intend to continue working." "Yes," he said, without hesitation or negotiation. She had been prepared for some negotiation. His immediate agreement moved her more than she showed. "Good," she said. He kissed both her hands. Then he sat back on his heels and looked at her with that open, unguarded expression that she suspected almost no one else in the world had ever seen on his face. "A child," he said. "Our child." "That is generally how it works," she said. He laughed, the surprised real laugh that she had come to love more than almost any other sound in her life. "I know how it works, Caroline. I know you know," she said. "I'm just fond of your face when I say something like that." He stood up and pulled her gently to her feet and held her, and she leaned against his chest and listened to his heart doing something rapid and joyful. And outside the morning was doing everything mornings do in the Texas panhandle when they are trying to justify the whole complicated business of living there, which is to say it was large and golden and extravagant. The child was born in February of 1884, in the Carver house, with the doctor from Crestwater attending and Jessup and Theodore in the parlor being very loud about being quiet. It was a boy, solid and loud from the first moment, with her green eyes and his dark hair, and an expression of immediate and comprehensive outrage at the disruption of his comfort that made her laugh through the final exhausted minutes and made Micah, who had been holding her hand through the whole of it with a grip that matched the one she had taken from him in the creek cut, press his face against her hair and say something she did not catch because it was quiet and only for her. They named him James, after nobody in particular, because they both liked the name and felt no obligation to honor a tradition either of them had found entirely reliable. Jessup held the baby with the practiced ease of a man who has done this before, years and grief and separation ago, and his face did the thing it had done at the wedding. Theodore stood next to him and watched this and swallowed hard, and then started talking about cattle prices, which was his method of managing emotion, and everyone let him. James Abbott Carver grew at the pace of something determined to make an impression. By summer he was pulling himself upright on the furniture, and by fall he was walking with the wobbling enthusiasm of someone who has recently discovered locomotion and cannot imagine why he waited so long. She kept her work, adjusting the schedule around his needs, finding a rhythm that was neither perfect nor permanent but was, on most days, genuinely manageable. Micah was with the boy in the evenings with a steady, attentive quality that she watched with the particular pleasure of seeing someone discover something in themselves they had not known was there. He had been built for this, she thought. The patience and the steadiness and the willingness to go slowly with something that needed slowness. "You are good at this," she told him one evening, James asleep on his chest in the chair by the fire. "I had good practice," he said, not looking up from the boy. "At what?" He looked up at her. "Learning to wait for something worth waiting for." She held his gaze for a moment, then returned to her book, because some things did not need an answer, they needed to be received. The summer of 1885 brought the Carver spread's best season to date. 1,200 head had grown to 1,600 through careful management and good breeding decisions, and the accounts showed a surplus that Micah reviewed with the particular satisfaction of a man who had calculated toward a goal for a long time and arrived at it. Caroline showed him the figures, and they sat together with the books the way they sat with most important things together, both looking at the same numbers, both understanding them fully. "We could expand the north pasture," she said. "The Billings parcel went up for sale last month. It borders our land and has good water." He considered it. The price, she had already looked into it. Fair, below market actually. Billings is moving back east. He would rather sell to a neighbor than deal with the negotiations of an outsider offer. "What do you think?" She appreciated still and always that he asked this. "I think it is the right moment. We are financially sound. The addition would increase our carrying capacity by roughly 300 head. The water situation on the north pasture has been the limiting factor. Then we should make Billings an offer." She drafted the letter that afternoon. The Billings parcel was acquired by the end of August, and the expansion of the north pasture was underway before the season turned. She was present for the fencing survey, riding the boundary with Micah and two of the hands, watching the land expand under ownership that would work it properly, and she felt the peculiar satisfaction of participation in something that was growing, that was building, that was accumulating into something substantial over time. Jessup's health declined in the autumn of 1885, slowly, the way health declines in men who have worked hard their whole lives and finally run into the debt that kind of work accumulates. He was not ill exactly, more diminished, moving more carefully, sleeping more, letting Theodore carry more of the weight with a graciousness that surprised his son and moved him considerably. Caroline continued her work for the double barge, which now she was doing almost entirely through correspondence with Theodore, who had become a genuinely reliable partner in the work. She went to visit Jessup on a Wednesday in November, and they sat on his porch in the thin winter sun, and he told her he was glad she had come to Texas. "I am glad I came," she said. "You sorted out my accounts and settled my water dispute and reformed my son," he said with the dry humor of a man who has been watching his own life story develop and finds it broadly satisfactory. "Not bad for a bookkeeper." "Theodore reformed himself," she said. "I just showed him where the work was." Jessup looked out at his land. "He is going to be all right." "More than all right," she said. "He is going to be good." Jessup died in December peacefully in his own house with Theodore holding his hand. She went to the service with Micah and James, who was nearly 2 and had no understanding of death, but understood, with the animal perception of small children, that the adults were sad, and stayed very close to his father the whole morning. Theodore inheriting the double bar J in full was a development she had prepared for administratively, and the transition of the accounts and documents was smooth and complete within a month. Theodore came to her office with the final paperwork and sat across her desk as she had sat across his desk in other circumstances and said, "I want to keep the arrangement. I need you for the complex work. I can manage the daily accounting now." "I know you can," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "My father thought very highly of you. He was an extraordinary man," she said. "I am glad I knew him." "So am I," Theodore said. "Lately I have been more glad of it than I used to be." She sent Theodore away with the new filing system, a full explanation of every account category and a standing agreement for quarterly review. He left looking like a man who had grown into himself, which was, she reflected, essentially what had happened. The spring of 1886 she told Micah she was going to have another child. This time she told him in the evening on the porch, where they often sat after James was in bed. The news met his face differently the second time, with a warmth that was calmer than the first time, less surprised and more settled, the joy of someone who has learned to hold good things without gripping them. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Tired," she said honestly, "but well." "Then we will take care," he said. He reached over and took her hand. "We will take care of everything." She squeezed his hand. Outside, the stars were beginning their nightly display over the Texas panhandle, that extravagant, disproportionate show that she had come to regard as one of the particular compensations of the landscape. She had been here 4 years. She knew every star in that sky by now, or felt as though she did. "Micah," she said, "I was not lost when I came here, but I was looking for something." "And," he said, she turned her head to look at him, "and I found it." He looked back at her in the starlight with the expression he had that she loved best, the one that had no strategy in it and no caution, just the plain truth of what he felt. "So did I," he said. The second child was born in October of 1886, a girl this time, whom they named Ruth, after Caroline's mother, which felt right in the way that things feel right when they have been arrived at rather than decided. Ruth came into the world with the same loud, comprehensive opinion about it as her brother had, but where James had immediately been quiet and observing once he adjusted, Ruth remained vocal in her views for the foreseeable future, which made her father laugh and her mother nod approvingly. James met his sister with the solemnity of a 3-year-old, given a responsibility, and intending to take it seriously. He sat on the bed beside his mother and looked at Ruth for a very long time and then said, with total conviction, "She is small. She will grow," Caroline told him. "Will she follow me around?" "Almost certainly." James appeared to consider whether this was a good or bad development, and arrived at the conclusion that it was probably acceptable. The years that followed were the years of building, the compound, accumulating, ordinary, extraordinary years that are the actual substance of a life lived well. James grew into a boy who was his father's steadiness and his mother's curiosity in equal measure, who followed Micah around the ranch with the devotion of an apprentice and sat in Caroline's office doing homework with the focused attention of someone who has absorbed from his environment that work done carefully is its own reward. Ruth grew into a child who had apparently inherited every opinion either of her parents had ever formed, and was not in the slightest shy about any of them, and who at 4 years old was already Micah's particular delight, because she asked the questions that he had always asked himself, and occasionally surprised him with the answers she arrived at. Theodore Jessup married a woman from Amarillo named Clara in 1887. A practical and warm-hearted woman who took one look at the accounting situation of the double bar J and volunteered to help, which both thrilled and slightly alarmed Theodore, who was by now genuinely fond of his own competence. Caroline and Clara found each other immediately useful and then genuinely fond. They rode together occasionally, which was good for both of them, and talked about their ranches and their husbands and the particular condition of being capable women in a landscape that required capability, and did not always remember to mention it. The water rights arrangement held and then improved. In 1880, all three ranchers, Micah, Theodore, and a new neighbor named Hartwell who had bought the Sutter spread when Sutter finally decided Texas had beaten him, sat down and renegotiated the spring agreement into something more robust, a full cooperative water management plan that acknowledged the reality of the land's needs rather than fighting over divisions that had been imaginary to begin with. Caroline drafted the framework. Forsyth and Amarillo approved it. All three men signed it. There were no lawyers required subsequently, which was, as Micah said afterward, the best possible result. She turned 30 in 1886, 32 in 1888, 35 in 1891, and each year she looked at her life and found it more fully itself than the year before. The accounts in the order she maintained them, the house the home she had made it, the children growing into people who were interesting to talk to, the man she had married still the most interesting person she had access to on a daily basis. They still rode on Sundays when weather and work permitted. They still sat on the porch in the evenings. He still said her name in the particular way that made her rediscover it. She still brought order to chaos with a systematic pleasure that he had stopped finding remarkable because it was simply what she did. The way the land was what it was, reliable in its nature even when unpredictable in its conditions. One Sunday in October of 1891, 9 years after she had stepped off a train in Amarillo with 2 leather cases and $32, she and Micah rode to the flat rock above the creek where he had asked her the question she had answered yes to, and they sat in the autumn afternoon looking at the country below them. The double bar J was visible to the east, busy with Theodore's continued expansion. The Carver spread around them in every direction, larger by the Billings parcel and 2 subsequent additions, 1,600 head now grown to 2,200, the north pasture green with the fall grass that came late but came reliably. The spring at the boundary was running well, shared properly between the ranches, doing what water does when it is not fought over. 9 years, she said. Yes, he said. Do you remember what you said to me, the day of the storm? He turned to look at her. I remember, she looked back at him. You said, I have got you, do not let go. I meant it then, he said. I mean it now. She leaned her shoulder against his and they looked at the country together, the wide, complicated, beautiful land that had asked everything of them and given back more than they had thought to ask for. And below them the creek ran where it always ran, steady and purposeful, knowing where it was going. We should go back, she said eventually. James wanted to show you what he has been doing with the calving records. He reorganized the whole system last week, Micah said, with the particular tone of a man who recognizes his son doing something that is exactly right. On his own, he developed a cross-referencing method I had not thought of. He gets it from me, she said. Obviously, he said. She got to her feet and he got to his, and they stood together at the top of the creek bank for a moment before they walked back to their horses, and she looked one more time at the track the 1882 storm had made, visible still if you knew where to look, a faint scar in the landscape that the grass had mostly healed over but not entirely. She had stood in that storm and been found. She had grabbed a coat and not let go. She looked at the man standing beside her in the October light, the limestone jaw and the dark eyes, and the steadiness that had never once wavered in all the years she had known it. And she thought about the $32 in her corset lining, and the letter she had read until it went soft, and the train platform, and the station wall, and a stranger who had offered her a ride to Crestwater and taught her the land as they crossed it. Not a stranger. Never, from the very beginning, a stranger. Come on, she said, and took his hand, and they walked back to their horses and rode home through the country that was theirs, that they had built together, that would hold the shape of everything they had given it long after they were gone. James was waiting at the fence with his cross-referenced calving records and an expression of barely contained impatience to show his work. Ruth was at the porch railing with an opinion she had been developing during their absence and was ready to deliver. The cook had something on the stove that smelled like the particular beef stew that had been their staple through 100 working evenings. Micah took the calving records from his son and studied them with his full attention while James explained his methodology, and Caroline stood at the porch with her daughter and listened to Ruth's opinions, which were numerous and not without merit. And the evening came down over the panhandle in the long amber way of Texas evenings, unhurried and expansive, and the coyotes would begin their singing shortly, and the stars would start their show. And the spring on the south boundary was running, and the cattle were settled, and the accounts were in order, and the house was full, and the man she loved was standing in the yard, reading their son's work with the same care he brought to everything. That mattered. She had not been lost. She had been finding her way, and here it was, every inch of it exactly as real as the grip in the creek cut and the words that had carried her through the worst of the storm. I have got you. She had never let go, and she never would.